The handcuffs clicked against my grandmother's pearl necklace as they led her away from the altar. Blood rushed in my ears, drowning out the gasps of 300 wedding guests, but I could still hear Jessica's final words echoing through Charleston's most prestigious chapel. "You'll regret this, Mrs. Thompson." I smiled and straightened my black dress. Regret was the last thing on my mind. My name is Margaret Thompson, though most folks call me Maggie. At 67, I've buried a husband, raised a son, and survived enough of life's curveballs to know when I'm being played. What I didn't expect was to spend my retirement years orchestrating the most spectacular wedding crash in Charleston's social history. The morning started like any other Saturday in March. Gray clouds hung low over the historic district, the kind of weather that makes brides pray and photographers curse. I'd been awake since 5, too excited to sleep, which probably sounds strange for a woman whose son's wedding had just been canceled in the most public way imaginable. But excitement was exactly what I felt as I stood in my kitchen, brewing coffee strong enough to wake the dead and reviewing my mental checklist one final time. The venue crisis I'd manufactured would hit at 11. Marcus Rivera would arrive from Atlanta at 1:30. The FBI would make their entrance precisely 15 minutes after the ceremony began. Everything had to be perfect. When you're destroying someone's life in front of God and 300 witnesses, timing is everything. I poured my coffee into the chipped blue mug Andrew had made me in 4th grade pottery class. My hand stayed steady despite the caffeine and adrenaline coursing through my system. Strange how calm I felt considering I was about to commit what most people would call an unforgivable act of maternal interference. The phone rang at exactly 9 o'clock. I knew it would be Andrew before I glanced at the caller ID. Mom. His voice carried that edge of barely controlled panic that had become familiar over the past few weeks. Something weird is happening. All the wedding vendors are calling Jessica about payments, but she says she never told them her family was handling anything. I settled into my kitchen chair, the one that squeaked whenever I shifted my weight. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Henderson next door watering her azaleas in her bathrobe. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that a few miles away, a professional con artist was about to have the worst day of her career. Oh my goodness, that does sound confusing, I said, letting maternal concern color my voice. What did Jessica say? She's pretty upset. She thinks someone is trying to sabotage the wedding. A pause. Mom, you wouldn't. The hurt I injected into my voice was only half feigned. Andrew Thompson, are you suggesting your mother would sabotage your wedding after everything I've done to help make this day perfect? No, I'm sorry. His relief was palpable. Jessica is really stressed, and when people are stressed, they sometimes look for someone to blame. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'm sure it's just a vendor mix-up. These things happen. I took a sip of coffee, bitter and perfect. The important thing is that you're marrying the woman you love today. If only he knew how prophetic those words would prove to be. After I hung up, I walked through my house, slowly taking in details I'd been too busy to notice during my weeks of planning. The morning light filtering through lace curtains my mother had hung 40 years ago. The faint scent of lemon oil from yesterday's cleaning. The family photographs lining the hallway Andrew's school pictures, our vacation to Myrtle Beach when he was 12, his college graduation, where he'd looked so proud in his cap and gown. All of it would change after today. The relationship I'd spent 32 years building with my son would be forever altered by what I was about to do. But sometimes love means being willing to become the villain in someone else's story until they're ready to see the truth. My purse sat on the hall table, packed with everything I'd need for the performance of my lifetime. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the envelope Patricia Hayes had given me 2 weeks ago. Bank records, arrest reports, photographs, everything that would prove Jessica Miller was actually Sarah Collins, and that my son had been marked for destruction from the moment she'd walked into his life. I thought about that first meeting 6 months ago, how Sarah had walked into our Sunday dinner at Andrew's apartment like she belonged there. Golden hair catching the lamplight, doe eyes wide with what I'd mistaken for nervousness, but now recognized as calculation. She'd worn a sundress the color of summer sky and carried a bottle of wine that cost exactly enough to seem thoughtful without appearing expensive. "Mrs. Thompson," she'd said, taking my hands in both of hers. "Andrew's told me so much about you. I feel like I know you already." The memory made my stomach turn. Every word had been rehearsed, every gesture designed to lower my defenses. And it had worked. Within an hour, I'd been planning their engagement party in my head. I checked my watch. 10:30. Time to get into position for the final act. As I reached for my car keys, my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Rivera. "20 minutes out, you sure about this?" I typed back without hesitation. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Because that was the truth. In 67 years, I'd made plenty of mistakes marrying too young, trusting too easily, keeping quiet when I should have spoken up. But this wasn't one of them. Today I was finally going to do what I should have done the moment I heard Sarah Collins laughing about the lonely old bat who'd given her $40,000. The drive to Bellamy Estate took me through Charleston's historic district past antebellum mansions and ancient oaks draped in Spanish moss. Beautiful enough to make tourists weep, the kind of setting that made everything seem romantic and timeless. The perfect backdrop for justice. I parked 2 blocks from Bellamy Estate and walked through Charleston's cobblestone streets, my heels clicking a steady rhythm against stones laid before my grandmother was born. The weight of my purse felt heavier with each step, not from the documents inside, but from the knowledge that I was carrying my son's future in a manila envelope. The estate service entrance was exactly where I remembered from my venue tours. Staff members rushed past in white uniforms, their faces tight, with the kind of panic that comes from vendors demanding payment 30 minutes before a ceremony. My manufactured crisis was working perfectly. I slipped through the kitchen entrance, nodding politely to a harried caterer, who barely glanced at the woman in black carrying a modest bouquet. Amazing how invisible you become when you look like you belong somewhere. The chapel was filling rapidly. Charleston's social elite dressed in their Saturday finest whispering behind programs about whether the weather would hold. I recognized faces from the country club, the historical society, Andrew's law firm. All of them expecting a fairy tale wedding, none of them knowing they were about to witness something far more dramatic. I positioned myself behind a marble column where I could see everything but remain hidden. From here, I watched my son pace nervously at the altar, adjusting his tie with the same nervous habit he'd had since childhood. At 32, Andrew still bit his lower lip when he was anxious, still ran his fingers through his hair when he was thinking hard. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, confident in the way successful men do when they believe their lives are unfolding exactly as planned. In 20 minutes, that confidence would be shattered, and I would be the one holding the hammer. My phone buzzed. Marcus Rivera. "In position. She's here. Just saw her arrive." Through the chapel's side windows, I caught glimpses of the bridal preparation area. Sarah Collins, Jessica Miller surrounded by bridesmaids in dusty rose silk, all of them fussing over her dress, her hair, her makeup. She looked radiant in that effortless way some women are born with, the kind of beauty that makes men forget their own names. But I wasn't looking at her beauty anymore. I was studying her performance. The way she tilted her head when someone spoke, creating intimacy. The practiced laugh that seemed spontaneous but never varied in pitch. The tears that appeared on cue whenever someone mentioned how blessed she was to have found Andrew. Every gesture was calculated. Every emotion was currency. At 1:45, the wedding march began. 300 guests rose to their feet, turning expectantly toward the chapel doors. Andrew's face transformed as those familiar notes filled the air, nervous energy replaced by pure joy. The doors opened and Sarah began her walk down the aisle. My grandmother's pearls gleamed against her throat, 4 generations of Thompson women reduced to props in her elaborate deception. The $12,000 dress flowed behind her like water, every step choreographed to perfection. She was breathtaking. Even knowing what I knew, seeing her move through that chapel like a vision in white, I understood completely why my son had fallen so hard so fast. The congregation sighed collectively as she passed phones, discreetly capturing every moment. In an hour, those same phones would be recording her arrest, but right now, she was the perfect bride living her perfect moment. She reached the altar. Andrew took her hands. The minister opened his worn Bible and began to speak about love commitment and the sacred bond of marriage. I pulled out my phone and typed 4 letters, N-O-W. The chapel doors burst open with enough force to rattle the stained glass windows. Every head turned as Marcus Rivera strode down the aisle like an avenging angel in a wrinkled construction worker's uniform. His work boots thudded against marble that had witnessed Charleston weddings for over a century, but nothing quite like this. Sarah's bouquet of white roses hit the floor with a sound like breaking glass. Sarah Collins. Marcus called out, his voice echoing through the stunned silence. "Did you really think you could hide forever?" I watched my son step protectively in front of his bride, confusion replacing joy on his face. "Sir, I think you have the wrong person. This is Jessica Miller." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor that made several elderly guests clutch their pearls. "Jessica Miller, is that what she's calling herself now?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila folder. "Her real name is Sarah Collins, and she's a professional con artist. I should know. I was her partner until she stole $15,000 from me." The chapel filled with the low buzz of 300 people trying to process what they were witnessing. I saw phones emerging from purses and pockets. By tomorrow, this moment would be immortalized on social media, but for now, it belonged to us. "That's not true." Sarah's voice cracked, the honey-sweet tone developing sharp edges. "Andrew, I don't know this man. He's clearly mentally ill." But Marcus was just getting started. He opened the folder with the efficiency of a man who'd been waiting 2 years for this moment. Here's Sarah at the Ritz-Carlton in Miami running a credit card scam on elderly tourists. He held up a photograph. Here she is in Birmingham posing as a cancer patient to steal from church collection funds. Each revelation hit like a physical blow. I watched the color drain from Andrew's face, watched doubt creep into his eyes for the first time since he'd met her. "And here's my favorite," Marcus continued, his voice growing colder. "Sarah leaving our hotel room in Memphis with my wallet, my watch, and the engagement ring I was stupid enough to buy her. Jessica." Andrew's voice was barely above a whisper. "What is he talking about?" Sarah's composure was cracking like ice in warm water. "He's lying, Andrew. You know me. We're getting married. I love you." "Love," Marcus barked. "Lady, you wouldn't recognize love if it bit you on your lying ass." He pulled out his phone. "You want to know what she really thinks about your precious Andrew? I've got recordings from our partnership. Want to hear what she called him, her pathetic mama's boy mark?" The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. I saw Andrew flinch as if he'd been slapped, saw the exact moment when hurt transformed into something harder. Sarah was fighting for her life, now appealing to every romantic notion Andrew had ever held. Even if any of that were true, and it's not, people can change. I'm not that person anymore. Andrew believes in second chances, don't you, darling? For a heartbeat, I thought she might actually pull it off. Andrew's fundamental decency warred with the evidence before his eyes. This was the same young man who'd brought home stray cats and defended bullied classmates. Of course he wanted to believe in redemption, but Marcus had saved the killing blow for last. Second chances. He smiled like a shark scenting blood. "Tell him about the other mark, Sarah, the one you're working right now." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the wedding photographer stopped clicking. What is he talking about? Andrew turned to look at his bride, and I saw the moment when love began its slow transformation into something else entirely. Marcus consulted his phone with theatrical precision. "Let me refresh your memory. 3 weeks ago, you called me asking for advice about a, quote, lonely old bat who's already given you $40,000. Ring any bells?" That's when Sarah's gaze found mine across the chapel. Recognition bloomed in her eyes like a poisonous flower. She knew exactly who had orchestrated this moment, who had outplayed her at her own game. "You," she whispered, pointing directly at me. "This was you. 300 heads turned to follow her finger, and suddenly I found myself center stage in a drama I'd scripted but never intended to star in. I stepped out from behind the marble column straightening my grandmother's pearls with as much dignity as I could muster. The chapel fell silent except for the whisper of fabric as guests shifted in their seats, straining to hear every word. Mom. Andrew's voice cracked like a teenager's. What are you doing here? You said you were going to Savannah. I met my son's eyes across 30 feet of marble and heartbreak. I lied, sweetheart. Something I learned from watching the experts. The admission rippled through the congregation like a stone thrown in still water. I could see people leaning forward, phones raised, recording every moment of what would surely become Charleston's most talked about social event of the decade. You orchestrated this, Andrew said, and I couldn't tell if his voice carried more horror or admiration. I exposed it. I corrected, walking slowly down the aisle toward the altar. Each step felt like walking through quicksand, heavy with the weight of consequences I couldn't take back. There's a difference. Sarah had found her voice again, and with it, her talent for manipulation. She's jealous, Andrew. Your mother couldn't stand that you chose me over her. She hired this man to destroy our wedding because she wants to control your life forever. It was a masterful last-ditch effort hitting every mother-in-law stereotype that existed. For a moment, I saw doubt flicker in Andrew's eyes. 29 years of Sarah's practiced lies versus 67 years of my love and sacrifice. Which would he choose to believe? That's when Marcus played his trump card. Mrs. Thompson didn't hire me, lady. I volunteered. He held up his phone again. Want to hear the recording I made of our conversation 3 weeks ago? The one where you laugh about how easy it is to manipulate lonely old women and their devoted sons. The recording quality was tinny, but Sarah's voice came through with crystal clarity. The old bat is so desperate for grandchildren, she'll believe anything. And the son complete mama's boy. All I have to do is cry about my tragic past, and he writes another check. Andrew's face cycled through colors like a traffic light, white-red, then a sickly gray that made me want to rush to his side. But this moment wasn't about protecting him anymore. It was about him finally seeing the truth. You want to hear the best part? Sarah's recorded voice continued. She gave me her grandmother's pearl necklace, said it was a family heirloom. I'll probably hawk it after the honeymoon. Instinctively, Andrew's eyes went to Sarah's throat where my grandmother's pearls gleamed against her pale skin. 4 generations of Thompson women reduced to a pawn shop transaction in her mind. Andrew, I can explain. Sarah's voice was desperate now, all pretense of control gone. Explain what? His voice was deadly quiet. Explain how you've been laughing at my mother while spending her money. Explain how you called me a mama's boy while pretending to love me. Explain how you were planning to rob us blind and disappear. The fight went out of Sarah all at once. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time since I'd met her, she looked her actual age instead of the innocent young woman she'd been portraying. It started as a job, she said quietly. Just another mark. But then I don't know. I thought maybe I could make it real. Real. Andrew's voice cracked. Your name, your job, your family, your entire life story. What exactly was supposed to be real about us? Before Sarah could answer, 2 men in dark suits appeared at the chapel entrance. They moved with the purposeful stride of federal agents, their presence transforming farce into felony. Sarah Collins. The taller agent held up his badge. FBI, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and violation of federal banking regulations. What followed was surreal. Federal agents reading Miranda rights in a chapel decorated with white roses and baby's breath. Wedding guests fumbling for phones to record history in the making. A bride in a $12,000 dress being led away in handcuffs while 300 of Charleston's finest watched in stunned silence. Sarah didn't go quietly. As the agents escorted her down the aisle, she kept turning back to scream at Andrew and me. This is harassment. I haven't done anything wrong. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. But her protests fell on deaf ears. Half the chapel was recording her arrest, and the other half was already texting the news to friends who'd missed the show. By evening, the video would be viral with hashtags like wedding crash and con artist bride. After the agents left with Sarah, an eerie silence settled over the chapel. 300 wedding guests sat in their pews, unsure whether to leave or stay, congratulate or commiserate. The minister stood at the altar looking like he'd never encountered this situation in seminary school. Andrew remained where Sarah had left him, still wearing his tuxedo, staring at the doors where his bride had just been arrested. The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable, then unbearable. Finally, he turned to face the congregation. "Well," he said, his voice carrying across the chapel, "this is awkward." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. I watched my son take control of an impossible situation with more grace than I dared hope for. "I want to thank everyone for coming today. I know this isn't how you expected to spend your Saturday afternoon." He ran a hand through his hair, that familiar gesture from childhood. "The wedding is obviously canceled, but the reception is already paid for. If anyone wants to stay for dinner and an open bar, you're welcome to it. God knows I could use a drink." This time, the laughter was genuine. People began standing, stretching, talking in small groups as shock wore off and reality set in. Some headed for the exits, already composing the text messages that would spread this story across Charleston's social networks. Others seemed determined to stay drawn by curiosity and the promise of premium liquor. Andrew finally looked in my direction. Our eyes met across the chaos, and I saw a mixture of emotions. I couldn't untangle gratitude, embarrassment, something that might have been admiration. He walked down the aisle toward me, and the crowd parted like the Red Sea. When he reached me, he stopped and just stood there for a moment, studying my face, as if seeing me for the first time. "Mom," he said finally, "we need to talk." I nodded. "Yes, we do." He reached up and carefully unclasped my grandmother's pearls from around his throat, the pearls that had started this whole nightmare. "These belong to you." I took them with shaking hands, feeling their familiar weight. "Actually, they belong to the woman my son eventually marries, when he finds someone worthy of them." Andrew's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry, Mom, for not believing you, for choosing her over you, for being such an idiot. You weren't an idiot, sweetheart. You were in love. Or at least you were in love with the person you thought she was." I reached up and straightened his tie, a gesture I'd been making since he was old enough to wear clip-ons. "Love makes us all vulnerable. The important thing is that you're safe." "How long did you know?" "I started suspecting something about a month ago. I had proof 2 weeks ago." I met his eyes. "I hired a private investigator, and Marcus, he volunteered for revenge duty when I called and told him where to find her." Andrew laughed despite everything. "You've been busy, haven't you?" "I've had a very educational few weeks." I took his arm. "Now what do you say we go face the music at your non-reception? People are going to have questions." The reception hall at Bellamy Estate had been transformed for a celebration that would never happen. White roses and baby's breath decorated every table. A string quartet played soft classics, while guests mingled awkwardly, unsure of the etiquette for post-arrest wedding receptions. But something magical happened as the afternoon wore on. With the pretense of a formal wedding stripped away, people relaxed in a way they never do at traditional ceremonies. Conversations flowed with unusual honesty. The bar opened early. The band switched from wedding classics to jazz standards that actually encouraged conversation rather than stifling it. I watched Andrew work the room with remarkable composure, accepting condolences and congratulations with equal grace. He thanked people for coming, apologized for the drama, and handled the entire situation with a maturity that made me proud in ways that had nothing to do with his professional success or choice in women. Marcus Rivera found me by the dessert table where I was contemplating whether it was appropriate to eat wedding cake when there hadn't actually been a wedding. "Mrs. Thompson." He extended his hand. "I wanted to thank you for giving me the chance to face Sarah after all this time." I shook his calloused hand, noting the strength of his grip. "I should thank you. I could never have exposed her without your help." "What you did took guts. Not many mothers would go to those lengths." Any mother would have done the same thing to protect her child. Marcus smiled. No, ma'am. Most mothers would have tried to talk their son out of it and failed. You played chess while the rest of us were playing checkers. Later, as the sun set over Charleston's historic district, I found myself alone on the estate's terrace with a glass of champagne I hadn't ordered. The party continued inside, but I needed airspace to process what I'd accomplished. I'd saved my son from financial ruin and emotional devastation. I'd exposed a criminal who'd been preying on innocent people for years. I'd proven that a 67-year-old widow wasn't as helpless as predators assumed. But I'd also destroyed his faith in love, at least temporarily. I'd orchestrated his public humiliation in front of 300 of his peers. I'd become the kind of interfering mother every man fears and every woman judges. Mom. Andrew appeared beside me with 2 fresh glasses of champagne. You look like you're having second thoughts. I accepted the glass gratefully, just wondering if there might have been a gentler way to handle this. You mean like sitting me down and explaining that my fiancé was a con artist? He raised an eyebrow. Because we both know how well I would have received that news. He had a point. You would have thought I was jealous and controlling. I would have accused you of exactly what Sarah said, trying to keep me dependent on you forever. Andrew sipped his champagne. You know what changed my mind? It wasn't Marcus showing up or even the recording. It was watching Sarah's face when she realized you'd outplayed her. What did you see? Cold calculation and genuine respect for a worthy opponent. He turned to look at me. She underestimated you completely. She thought you were just a lonely old woman who'd do anything to keep her son happy. She had no idea she was trying to con someone smarter than she was. We stood in comfortable silence watching Charleston's skyline transition from day to night. Church bells chimed in the distance, marking the hour when Andrew should have been cutting cake with his new bride, instead of sharing champagne with the mother who'd saved him from making the biggest mistake of his life. I have a confession, Andrew said eventually. What's that? Part of me is relieved. He held up a hand before I could respond. Not about the public humiliation or the arrest, but something always felt off about Jessica. I could never put my finger on it, but sometimes, when I'd catch her off guard, she'd look at me like she was trying to remember who she was supposed to be. Why didn't you say anything? Because I thought it was just wedding stress. And because... He sighed. Because I was 32 years old and had never been in love before. I thought if I questioned it too hard, it might disappear. My heart ached for him. Oh, sweetheart. Pathetic, right? The mama's boy who falls for the first pretty girl who pays attention to him. No, I said firmly. Human. You're human, and humans want to be loved. There's nothing pathetic about that. Andrew raised his glass. Here's to justice served ice cold with a side of public humiliation. I raised mine to meet his. Here's to family and knowing when to fight for the people you love. As our glasses clinked, I realized that despite everything, the lies, the betrayal, the public spectacle, I was exactly where I belonged, standing beside my son who was safe and free, and finally seeing clearly again. Sometimes the best weddings are the ones that never happen. 6 months later, I received a letter from the federal penitentiary where Sarah Collins was serving her sentence. She'd been convicted on multiple counts of fraud and was facing 5 years without parole. The letter was brief, written in the careful script of someone with too much time to think. Mrs. Thompson, I underestimated you. That was my mistake. You're tougher and smarter than I gave you credit for. I hope you're satisfied with how everything turned out. Your son is lucky to have a mother who fights for him, even when it makes her the villain in his story. Respectfully, Sarah. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the same fireproof box where I kept my important documents. Not because I treasured it, but because it was evidence of something significant the moment I stopped being underestimated and started being feared. Andrew never married again, though not for lack of opportunity. He dated carefully, introducing me early in the process and listening when I voiced concerns. He never again accused me of interference or jealousy. The experience had taught him the difference between a mother's intuition and a mother's manipulation. As for me, I discovered that saving one son from a con artist had given me a new purpose. I began volunteering with Patricia Hayes, the private investigator who'd helped expose Sarah. Together, we worked with elderly clients who suspected they were being scammed by romantic partners or family members. It turned out that a 67-year-old grandmother who'd orchestrated the most spectacular wedding crash in Charleston's history had a certain reputation in the world of domestic investigation. Criminals underestimated me at their own peril. But the most satisfying part wasn't the work or the recognition. It was the Sunday dinners at Andrew's house, where he'd found peace in his own company, and I'd learned to trust that my job as his protector was finally done. Well, mostly done. After all, you never know when your son might need his mother to save him from his own heart again. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And remember, sometimes the people who love you most are the ones willing to be the villain in your story, until you're ready to see the truth. Your voice matters.